thank you everyone for joining us. So a few logistics on Zoom. Please stay on mute while you're not speaking. We do encourage you to choose the gallery view so that we can, you can see the most people and we can interact better. You can use the raise hand function, but also the chat or the Google Doc to add your questions or remarks as we go. We'll be checking the Google Doc, so we'll bring in these comments to the plenary, to the room. And in addition to Zoom, we will be using a Google document throughout the session. So if you're just joining, Zarko is going to share the link. Rocio just shared the link in the chat. So please open it if you're able, and yes, because there will be a lot of interaction in the Google Doc too. So why are we here today? We're here today for our session in the Fetal Network Festival, Communities of Practice, Breaking Knowledge Silos to Catalyze Culture Change and Unlock Innovation. This session is inspired by the wonderful book that was recently launched, Communities of Practice at the World Bank, which is a book that demonstrates the strategic importance of communities of practice and knowledge management to organizations. We have the book editors today with us, and they will be sharing the lessons of, taking these communities seriously and for a long time, and drawing a lot of results from all of that. For our agenda, we have, three main sections. We will have a presentation of the book overview. Then we're gonna have in-focus discussions with the editors to debrief what you heard. And finally, we'll have lots of breakout groups for you to dive deeper into what was shared and connect that with your experience. And then we're going to wrap up. A little information about who we are. So the organizers of the session. This session was organized in collaboration between three communities: the Community Builders Community of Practice, the Knowledge Management for Dev, KM for Dev Community of Practice, and the Fetal Network. The Community Builders Community of Practice is a relatively new network connecting, practitioners that build communities of practice around the world. The KM for Dev is a community that connects knowledge management professionals and has been going strong for 20 years. Applause. And the Fetal Network, as you know, is a network for social impact networks that is doing a great job and hosting us all in this wonderful festival. The three groups have a lot in common, and you can find more information about us in the important links section in the Google Doc. Click on that. We encourage you to check what each one of these groups have to offer, and if you want, please join us. It will be great to have you as one of our members. And now a little, introduction for our guests. Today, thank you very much for our guests. We have here Dr. Ede Jihad Vasquez, Dr. Monica Weber-Farr, and Fiucar. Ede is a senior advisor and the former World Bank senior director. He worked in the World Bank for 23 years and has extensive experience in sustainable development, infrastructure, and climate change. Ede is a champion for knowledge management and communities of practice and makes them central to leadership and to his management style. Monica is an adjunct profession and advisor with a focus on innovative cooperation and result orientation. She also has a very important career at the bank with a 33-year history, has been a key figure advancing knowledge and learning initiatives, including as Director for Knowledge and Learning and Results for Sustainable Development. And Phil has retired from the World Bank after 26 years of experience. During his career, he led knowledge and learning agenda of one of the largest global technical practices in the bank, as well as the World Bank Institute, the East Africa region, and the Beijing office, where he spearheaded the World Bank's engagement with China and South-South cooperation. So thank you to the three of them. I'm gonna give the floor to them in a few seconds. But as we move to the first, section of our event, this one in this section we'll be covering the overview of the book, and to set the stage. So the book Communities of Practice at the World Bank. The World Bank is this large international development organization, worked in every sector across more than 100 countries with more than 20,000 staff, many partners, stakeholders. And Communities of Practice has been an important instrument for the World Bank since the 1990s. Last time there was an inventory done, there was more than 350 of those communities in the bank. They have different kind of supports depending on the department that they are, on their objective and strategy. The book, among other things, talk about the story of one of the World Bank departments that gave this strategic importance to knowledge and communities, and drove like an organizational change focused on the change that these structures can bring about. So this is the stage. I hope, it got you interested. And to get started, I want to, of course, let the speakers introduce themselves a little bit. And for that, I would like to, again, thank you, Ede, Fio, and Monica for joining us today. And thank you very much for dedicating your time and your efforts to, document all that this wonderful experience and write this special book. The book is very disruptive because it takes knowledge management and communities seriously, instead of treating it as a backroom function. We are among knowledge professionals here, so we understand the strategic value of knowledge and community. But let's be true. Unfortunately, this is not what we see regularly. It is rare to see senior management leaders valuing knowledge and creating the structures necessary for it to work. So what I'm curious to learn is, why is it different with you? What happened in your life and career journey that made you a believer and a champion for knowledge sharing and for communities? We would like to start with Monica, please.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And I love being here with you in this particular setting that I am signing up for. I hadn't actually known you existed. That goes for knowledge sharing, right? For me, the journey into caring for knowledge management, knowledge sharing, and using knowledge goes way back. I started my professional career as a journalist. And when you work for a newspaper, knowledge has its own importance, motivation. There is a lot about truth and being honest about what you see. But you don't really think about how to manage it. You have an affection to the substance. You don't really understand the processes, though. The second point was when I did my PhD as a labor economist on wage setting, and I discovered a marked difference between wages of organizations that were large and closed and ones that were very open. And the rationale that we found out in a lot of interviews had to do with knowledge invested in workers. Where they weren't leaving, they were worth more and were more of a flight risk, and thus received a higher salary. At that point, I was trying to give my PhD the title Knowledge at International Organizations, or actually it was Knowledge at Multinational Companies. And my professor told me not to, it wouldn't sell well. Goes to that point, right? Then many years later, when I was working in the same leadership group as Ede in the sustainable development space of the World Bank, which at the time was the largest grouping of World Bank staff, I was asked to head the portfolio for knowledge, learning, and results. And I started to dive really deep into what it means to manage structure. You know all of this much better perhaps than I do. So I'm not a trained knowledge manager, but I have come from a deep love and appreciation. I should also say that I joined the World Bank at the same time as a president called Wolfensohn, who 3 years later declared the opening of the Knowledge Bank. Little did we know what it meant, and many of us, including myself, Phil and Ed in different locations that we were at the time went on a journey to figure out what does it mean if as a bank you don't only invest money, but you're also trying to make knowledge work for your clients so that it brings more dividends than what they have invested in, right? I mean, there is the saying that knowledge, like love, is one of the few things that grows when sharing it. So that was kind of my personal story, I should say. But maybe one last word to the book. I came a little bit as a third person. Eddie and Phil, they will talk more about it, but they started summarizing the experience of that particular area that they were working in. Exercise leadership did a massive turnaround by using KM tools. I was watching them from afar, working on the larger structure around that. And then when we wrote it and put it together, wrote articles and pulled different authors together, we realized that it's good to have the context, which is how I came in. But thank you very much, Claudia. Back to you.
Thank you, Monica, for sharing. I mean, your love for KM and also, I mean, your contributions to the book. Phil, would you like to go next, please?
Sure, I just needed to unmute myself. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's fantastic to see so many people interested in this topic. Like Monica, I came into the world of KM before it really was a well-established discipline, before there was professionals who were specialized in what was becoming called knowledge management. I came into it from a recognition, I guess, that in work I had been doing at the World Bank, and prior to joining the World Bank, I had recognized the importance of having mechanisms for systematically allowing for sharing of knowledge and experience, and in particular, recognizing that the mechanisms that existed for absorbing tacit knowledge in particular did not really work very well, that organizations were not doing well at sort of understanding the how-to aspects of the challenges that they were facing. So much of my work in knowledge management was around the aspect of peer-to-peer and practitioner-to-practitioner knowledge exchange, recognizing that our clients at the World Bank were increasingly looking not for an external party to synthesize and explain to them good practice or why things worked and so forth, but rather wanting to be connected with people and organizations that face the same challenges that they were facing, had successfully or unsuccessfully dealt with them, and had really absorbed the whole holistic way in which those challenges needed to be addressed. So communities of practice was a natural sort of evolution of that notion of peer-to-peer exchange, but with a larger group, and was fortunate to be in a number of situations during my time at the World Bank where I was able to spearhead the development of initiatives and programs to really foster these types of communities and other forms of peer-to-peer exchange, and having the authorizing environment to do it on a larger scale and to see how it could impact the way an organization worked.
Thank you, Phil. I mean, it takes courage and kindness to, I mean, recognize that the knowledge is among peers. And yeah, it is great to see this, you and I mean, the team spearheading this initiative. Eddie, what about you? What made you a knowledge and communities champion?
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you to Zarko, Rocio, and all of you who are present today and spending a few minutes with us talking about these ideas. So, as Claudia said, I spent 23 years at the World Bank, and what I was really interested was to try to figure out how do you solve really complex development challenges. How do you actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs? How do you provide water, safe drinking water to everybody? How do you make sure that everybody has access to electricity? How to expand services like health and education to everybody? And the natural tendency in large organizations is that this is just an issue of funding. We just need to mobilize more funding and money is going to solve the problem. I was always convinced that actually that is an important part of the problem, but actually finding solutions that are truly applicable to each country needs two things. One is to understand the local context and work with the communities and with the local governments to say, how do you solve the problems? But also that there's no time for each community and locality to invent their own solutions. And the world is really facing existential challenges like climate change, that if things don't get resolved fast enough, and if there's no experimentation around the world and learning across, these issues are not going to be solved. Now, I'm not a knowledge management expert. I never worked or was trained in knowledge management, but when I was part of the senior leadership of the World Bank, here you have, I was managing 700 staff and 1,000 consultants located in about 90 countries, working in 150 other countries. And how do you actually connect them, gives them a sense of cohesion and purpose and passion around that process? And many people tend to go into, yeah, let's just write a few slogans, let's do a little bit of retreats. But we were convinced that it is actually action on the ground and changing things and solving problems that really gave purpose to an organization. And actually, achieving that at a faster speed, with better quality, with more efficiency, with greater impact, needed a lot of knowledge transfer across. And many people think, oh, yeah, you just do your solution, you write it up, and then that's it, problem solved. It's not like that. It takes a lot of time to be isolated, write a solution, pass it on to somebody, test it, doing all that. We needed a completely different model, and that's where we began to work with communities of practice. So for us, communities of practice was not that something that a group of people does on the side out there. It became integral to our mission, integral to our culture, integral to the way that we were operating to solve really difficult challenges. And our team was really working on helping cities become more sustainable, dealing with natural disasters that were destroying lives and livelihoods around the world, tackling really difficult issues for indigenous peoples in every continent, or land titles and rights in that direction. And how do you learn fast? How do you experiment with your partners? How do you actually build that excitement around solutions? Was what drove me into knowledge management, and more specifically communities of practice. And then when we retired, we said we need to write it all up, and this is what the book is all about.
Wonderful. Yeah, and with that, I'll give you the opportunity to, just illustrate this better with the overview of the book.
Wonderful. And we want to show just a few slides. And Monica is actually at the airport in Austria. So she'll kick off with a few slides, and then I'll pick it up for the rest of the conversation. And then we'll go into 2 breakout rooms as Claudia was describing. Monica, do you want to start? I'll move the slide from here.
Yes, thank you. If you were moving, there are 3 little bubbles on that first slide, and or 2. The point of these bubbles is to share or to make or explain that this is unlike many other books. In fact, having scanned through what kind of books there exist out there about knowledge management, for one, it's actually a book about the World Bank. So if people are interested what curious organization this is, you do dive in, you see, how are they organized? What are they thinking about? What topics do they care for? How do decision-making processes work? So you get a lot about the organization. It's also a very personal book, because each chapter really is told from the perspective of an individual that had a particular task. a task of setting up a community of practice, a task of building a library, a task of running a help desk. It's mostly about those that worked on, built up, and to some degree also had to close down communities of practice, but it has a number of other knowledge roles in there as well. And finally, it's really unique in the things that you see here told as stories. There is no, this is the input, this is the output, but it's really experiential. And to that end, it is a people book. It takes a very strong people dimension of knowledge management. Those of you working on knowledge management day to day know there's a very specific technology perspective on KM. There's a very specific organizational / process perspective on KM. And then there's that people perspective. That you see most coming through in this book. Next slide. With the next slide, I wanted to, hello, Eddie, tick, tick, tick. This is just a quick list of multiple communities of practice that you will hear about in a moment. And just to make the point, and I call them heroines and heroes of this book, the people who build these communities, who stay with them, who sustain them, people like yourselves. And I call them heroines and heroes because, as you well know, the success is far from evident from the beginning. Rewards are far from evident from the beginning and throughout, and usually the rewards come on the personal, on the moral, on the side, but not on the pecuniary or on the career side. Now, next slide. The book is 3 elements. At the core is the story of 8 Global Solutions Group, which was the technical term that we use for communities of practice, and stories around culture change, around evaluation, around KM lessons, and particularly the leadership stories. I think that's why many of you may be here to understand the leadership stories. There is an element of contextual chapters that tell you how knowledge at the World Bank works, what was the history, etc. And then there's a couple of fun things about what I call a rather unique ecosystem, describing features of the World Bank's knowledge ecosystem that other organizations don't necessarily have. Help desks, archives, etc. A lot of people have, but the types of archives, the type of help desks, the Tokyo Development Learning Center, these are things that are quite unique and fun to explore. Also, if you work for large organizations or advise them, as much as when you work with broader networks. Because one of the things that one realizes is that the broader networks need some form of network support wherever they operate from the knowledge side just as much. With that, back to Eddie.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you for connecting from the airport. I know that it's not easy in this, and I know you need to board a plane very soon. So thank you very much for that context. And what we wanted to communicate was really that the challenge for large organizations or large networks who work on policy and development is that first is an information overload, and especially the way that is being processed and the biases that AI may be coming into is a real challenge. And at the same time, there are really wicked development challenges, all the way from climate change to issues of inequality to issues of fragility, conflict, and wars. The world is getting more complicated, and there's a lot more information overload. Second, many of these organizations are having very complex matrix structures. This is, as an example, all of the organizations that work on health and human services in the US. And if anybody can understand this network, I have no clue who can do that. But it is not very uncommon. The World Bank has a similar organigram if you were to draw it. And actually, nobody has drawn it because it is so complex. So you're having information overload, you have really difficult development challenges, and you have really complex organizations working on all that. The premise of the book and what we lived through was that knowledge management can be an important source of a comparative advantage, that this is not just a backroom function, that this is not something that a few people in some offices somewhere are doing for you. This is an integral part of a comparative advantage. And we talk about 4 myths that many of these organizations are facing, and many leaders will say, knowledge management, really, why? Myth number 1, really, I have no time for knowledge management. I really need to deliver to my client either alone or analytical work or a solution, something on the ground, don't come to me and talk about knowledge management, really. And we said, look, the only way to really deliver faster, better, and more targeted is through knowledge management in the process. Second myth, oh, I know what my client wants. I don't need to look around. They know exactly what is it that they're looking for. What is this knowledge management? Why do I need to waste time connecting with other people and figuring out what other countries are doing or other communities are doing? Let me just do my work. And part of the process was that actually that incestuous relation of doing the same thing over and over and over again without looking at the lessons leads to much slower progress in anything that you're doing. Third, on knowledge management, there is this myth that if you can fix the IT system, and now everybody says, oh, machine learning and artificial intelligence will solve the knowledge management challenge. And we said, no, not really. It is great to have those tools, but it's really people who have that knowledge. It is really people who can use that knowledge. It is people who can, through their interactions with others, create those new solutions. So don't think that the IT is going to solve your problem. Actually, IT is only a tool. It is people at the center of that knowledge exchange and management. And the fourth myth that we saw all the time is that, sorry, we cannot have it all. You want either quality, or you want efficiency, or you want creativity and innovation. Then our argument through this work was to say, look, actually, you are able to have it all. You can have it all. You can have all of those things. If you flip the equation and say knowledge management is not an afterthought, knowledge management is integral for better quality, is really integral to make an organization more efficient. It is integral, if you design it well, to come up with more innovative solutions, because you are having the opportunity to work fast in some of these problems in different environments, different communities, different situations, and it is out of that bubbling of activity that you become more creative and more innovative. We had lots of discussion also, and this is very common in organizations, where people think that the knowledge is in headquarters. And we said, sorry, knowledge is everywhere where action is taking place. Action is the one that creates a knowledge. So in the World Bank, there's this bias towards everything is in Washington, D.C., but if you look at other global organizations, there's a headquarters or there's a regional headquarters, and everybody thinks that's where the knowledge is, and let's call them to see what's out there. Our premise was knowledge is decentralized. You need to connect everybody at the same time, all together in a structured manner, so that they can learn, they can experiment, they can share the knowledge, they can create together, they can co-create with their clients and become faster, more efficient, better quality for the services that they provide. And at the core, we said, look, the solution is going to be communities of practice. There were other groups in the World Bank that said, no, we need to focus more on a structured knowledge generation. We need to focus on documenting through certain tools like fast knowledge, sound bites, these kind of things to capture the knowledge and to disseminate. We took a completely different approach, and we said, look, it is people talking to each other, connecting within a structured framework that really can change the situation. And we, at the core, knew that it was really critical to change the culture. And we began to say, look, knowledge is not the business of knowledge management teams. Knowledge is everyone's business. Knowledge is critical for everybody, and you will be evaluated not only on the loans that you give, not only on the products and solutions that you offer, you will be evaluated on how active a knowledge citizen you are within the structure. And as you know, there's always a silo mentality, which is a headache in all large organizations. As soon as you're a large organization, you create an organigram. As soon as you create the boxes create the silos. And part of our work through the communities was to try to say, we really need to figure out how to tackle those silos. So communities of practice were not a new concept for us. It was not a new concept in the World Bank. How we apply to say the really wicked, the solutions to the really difficult and wicked development challenges and problems that the world is facing needs to break those silos altogether and needs to have a very structured cultural change of moving to a more collaborative models of engaging fast learning, processing that information in ways that are a lot more structured. But also at the core, what I think the book demonstrates is that it is leadership and the adoption and the understanding that knowledge management is at the core of comparative advantage. It is at the core of providing better solutions for your client. It is at the core of building the capacity, the excitement, the innovation of your team. It is when leadership gets those that it actually becomes. And we began to really together with our management team to say, let's create a strong knowledge ecosystem from the bottom up. Let's break the silos within the organization and let's leverage something that is was unique for our organization, which is that globality. Now, another message from the book is to say, look, it's not only just within an organization. You have networks on networks, and that globality, that realization that the world is really facing challenges that are common across, that humanity is one and the same, that the local circumstances, traditions, and cultures may be different, but actually the challenges are the same. Clean waters for everybody, health and education for everybody, making sure that the resilience and adaptation to climate change is at every household and community. Those issues may be global, that global connectivity of local action is what makes the sense. And therefore, we began to change a lot of the culture in saying learning is critical and all the time. Communication and knowledge management is core to our success. You can't just think that money and loans are going to solve the problems of the world. It is really how to solve these problems that makes a difference. And we began pushing on knowledge management to say, look, it's not only important to talk the walk and say, what is it that we're going to do? You also need to walk the talk and show yourself as a leader that you are a knowledge citizen, that you are not only supportive of this, but that you are learning, sharing, co-creating all the time. Over communication for change, the constant process of saying knowledge management is important, constant knowledge, demonstrating and sharing of what knowledge communities were working, and very importantly, recognize the failures. And that was one of the most difficult things we had to do, because demonstrating, showing things that don't work are equally important. And knowledge is not only about reports. Knowledge is not only about fancy briefs. Knowledge is also about innovative solutions. So communities of practice at the core is what we did, but we also said, look, the communities of practice, there's no one size fits all for the kind of things that we are doing. There were communities that were innovators, generally young people that were really passionate about making cities greener and more livable by reforming open spaces and public parks. And actually, that's not very common for a bank that lends money to a city. Generally, a mayor will think first about infrastructure and services and finances and all that. Who is going to talk about parks and making the city beautiful? Well, actually, this community of practice created the space, the solutions, the pilots to show actually those things are not only important for livability, they are critical for the competitiveness of your cities. We had communities where in a large organization, there's a lot of tensions between the silos. And actually, when a client calls, the solution that is delivered depends on who picks up the phone. This community was brought people together through a lot of painstaking breaking of the silos to say, look, we can offer better solutions to our clients if we work together. If we are able to come with different solutions that each of us is promoting, and we combine them in a much better menu of options to give to our clients. There were others that said, look, let's break silos between cities and transport, and let's figure out how do you make sure that people move faster. And some of the ideas that have been around theoretically for many years, how do you actually apply to developing countries? So there were many communities in that process. There was a community of researchers that loved to do research in their offices, and they were just happy with the research. And at some point, some of them began to say, how do we accelerate the research that we're doing into practical applications on the ground? And how do we create a community in that process? Claudia, go ahead. No, sorry. Okay. Something that we also defined for the communities of practice was a vision of how they wanted them to go. We wanted these communities over the years to become centers of excellence globally for the topics where they were working. And we knew that some were more advanced than others. And understanding where a community of practice is in their evolution was really critical for success. And making sure that wherever you are in your stage of development, you have a very clear impact framework. And you'll see in the book examples of how do we force each of the communities not to be vague in what they were doing, not to just focus on having events to share information, but being a lot more practical on how do you influence the solutions that you are providing to your clients. We use what we call a garden approach. And many people confuse garden approach with letting 1,000 flowers bloom. And you want to find, from the leadership perspective, that balance between letting a lot of creativity come in, but also a little bit of a structure, because you don't have infinite resources to support every possible community of practice. So the garden approach is the one that allows communities to grow and flourish, but through a disciplined approach, have periodic reviews to say, are you really achieving your stated goals? Are you really having the impact on the business? Are you really being able to demonstrate that you're generating new solutions? Because if you're not, then you really need to move them from the garden, put them in the greenhouse, let them hibernate for a little bit, and then making sure that you're moving and managing the garden as a good gardener. So you're letting flowers bloom, but you're making those blooming managed in a way that is not too controlling, but enough to create a beautiful garden. That balance, I think, was really important for us. And finally, we created several instruments that Monica mentioned. Instead of having every community of practice create these boutique solutions that everybody gets very passionate about and they are all about pilots, we said, look, you really need to move from the boutique to the systematic. You really need to avoid reinventing the wheel, everybody individually, and move into more structured processes. And we, for example, we had lots and lots of exchanges between countries of specific topics, one-to-one, and it was really expensive. It was really slow. And we moved from that individual, really boutique approach to a more systematic approach to sharing the knowledge. We moved from the retail to the wholesale. Instead of countries learning from each other, having groups of countries learning from groups of countries. And we eventually moved from the internal part of the organization to say, yes, it is wonderful that we're sharing the knowledge and creating it ourselves internally. We also need to make sure that countries around the world, governments, communities, groups of researchers are also able to build their capacity to manage their knowledge. Claudia, I'm conscious of the time, and I want to make sure that there's ample opportunities for the discussion groups to come and break out into that direction. But hopefully this gives you a sense of how we approach within our group in the World Bank this idea of communities of practice, not as a nice things to do, but central to the mission, central to the success, central to the development of new solutions altogether. Back to you, Claudia.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, I'll let Zarko explain how the breakout groups are going to work.
Yeah, perfect. So we're going to move into two breakouts, one with Ede and one with Phil. I'm going to share my screen briefly just to point you to the place in the Google Doc, where we'll be. So the idea is, if you're in group one, with Ede, you can write questions here where there's bullets. And then reflections, key reflections under that. And then same thing for group, group two with Phil. So you can see the topics. The idea is in each group, there'll be a light moderator who'll kick off the conversation. You can put questions in the chat, and then they'll try to respond to as many questions as they can before we come back to the main session. So
Zarko, just to differentiate and let people know what are the emphasis of the two groups. So Phil was the lead person on the knowledge management as the knowledge management expert in a group. And therefore, if you want to know tips and tricks and the inner workings of how we made it work on communities of practice, Phil is the person to talk to. In my breakout group, we will be talking about more the leadership function. How do you actually convince managers and CEOs that knowledge management is really important, and what are the arguments to be able to use in that connection? So just for people to know which group to go into. Back to you, Sarko.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Ade, for clarifying. So the idea is you'll be in the breakout, take notes in the Google Doc in terms of questions, and then listen to what people have to say. Of course, when you're in one, you're not in the other, so both will be recorded. And so whichever one you're in, after the event, when we compile the recordings, you'll be able to watch what happens in the other group, so you don't miss anything. So that's just an important point. I'm going to open the rooms shortly. I set them up in such a way that just automatically, given that there's so many people here, we have just over 100 people here, we'll lose a lot of time if we do it manually. So you automatically go to one of the two rooms. So you can stay there, or if you really feel compelled to go to the other one for whatever reason, once you're there, you have the option to move rooms. I suggest, in the interest of time, you just stay where you are, because you can always watch the recording of the other room as well. But yeah, feel free to move as well. So rooms are opening now, and we'll be there for about 15 minutes. After that, we'll come back and we'll hear just very brief kind of nuggets from what happened.
So welcome everybody. So me and Rocio will be facilitating, like light facilitation. We have some questions just to get us started. And Phil, are you here? Do we see Phil? Okay, yes.
I'm here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Wonderful. Rocio, would you like to get us started with one of the questions?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll share that with you in a second. But yeah, so let me ask like the first general question, and then we're gonna go to Mick. I see that he already has his hands up. Great. So Phil, to get us started, can you talk a little bit about the COP ecosystem that was structured for this reorganization at GP SUR? I'm saying that, but it's the urban and other things department in the bank. Can you talk a little bit about that, so that we understand how do you connect all these communities so that they generate the expected results?
Sure. So as Ede mentioned, we put communities of practice at the center of our knowledge ecosystem, with the intention of signaling the fact that knowledge sharing and knowledge curation and utilization of effective solutions should be at the core of the work that everyone was doing. But we wanted people to feel that knowledge communities or communities of practice were, in fact, something that would not only enhance the organization's overall effectiveness, but would be something that they could sort of identify with as individuals. So we decided to take very much initially of a bottom-up approach to establishing these communities. So we put out an open call for proposals for people to suggest communities that they wanted to establish and be part of. And we set some loose criteria. One was that the communities were intended to encourage knowledge sharing and collaboration across formal organizational boundaries. So, for example, 3 people within the same unit within the global practice could not suggest a community of practice. They had to have at least one person to be part of sort of the leadership group who would come from a different department. And we didn't even limit it to our own global practice. We indicated that we would entertain proposals for communities that included other parts of the organization, as long as at least one member of the leadership team would come from our global practice. Secondly, we made it very clear from the start that these communities would need to address and support some part of the operational work of the organization. We wanted to avoid a situation where the communities of practice were seen to be focusing on curating, sharing, synthesizing knowledge simply for knowledge's sake. We wanted to tie it to the operational work of the global practice because we had seen that that had been one of the shortcomings of previous community of practice activities within the World Bank. And I'll give you a very specific example here of how some of the communities tied to operational work before I continue. So one of the key aspects of the way that the World Bank handles quality assurance are peer reviews. Peer reviews of projects at concept stage, peer reviews at midterm review stage, and peer reviews of final evaluations. And typically the way peer reviews would work is that the leader of a project, after having designed and having a concept note, would sort of invite a couple of quote unquote senior experts within the organization to sort of be peer reviewers, and there would be a formal review meeting. And it worked well, but it had some shortcomings, notably lack of opportunity for younger staff to be involved or for really new innovative ideas. So what a couple of the communities of practice did is they actually took on the peer review process, crowdsourcing rather than having an assigned set of 1 or 2 peer reviewers. So when a new project was being developed within the area of focus of that community, they would share the concept note and invite comments from all levels of staff. And we found that this not only enhanced the quality of peer review, that many new ideas came through, but most importantly, it gave younger staff a chance to be part of the peer review process, to have their ideas recognized, and to feel that they were part of a technical community. But going back to the overall system, one of the other things that we recognized early on was the importance of strong community managers. Initially, we allowed every community to sort of select its own community manager, and we found that many of them were hiring consultants who were subject matter experts, but didn't necessarily have training or experience in community management. Fortunately, the World Bank at corporate level had initiated a community manager training program, and even with a bit of an accreditation to it. So after the first 6 months or to a year or so of our initiative, we decided to centralize that community management function, to have community managers hired by
He froze.
in the community management function, that community managers did in fact have that specialized training, and that we were able to provide the necessary resources. And by having those resources separate from the budget allocations to each community, we were assured that rather than them using their entire budget, let's say, for activities and short selling the community management function, that they would have strong community managers, and that proved to be extremely effective. And the last important aspect of the approach, and that Ede alluded to, was having a robust monitoring and evaluation system. And again, we took a bottom-up approach here. We had a framework. We recognized that communities were at different levels of maturity. Those that were new needed to focus on building their communities. Those that were more mature needed to really demonstrate their value add in terms of operational relevance. So we allowed the communities to pick their own indicators from within a menu, if you will, for each level of maturity. So they very much picked their own indicators, but knew that they would be accountable for their results and success within those indicators. So I would say that the three elements that were most important were the bottom-up approach to setting up communities, the assurance of strong community management, and a robust assessment system.
Thank you, Phil. This is great. I mean, just to let you know, we have lots of questions for you in the Google document. I will share the direct link to the questions here, and hopefully you will have time later to answer some more of those questions. But I'll ask Rocio to choose the next one. And thankfully, I mean, I guess with this initial overview, we were able to answer a few of the questions already. But Rocio, yes, can you choose a second one, please?
So one of the questions is, are the cups for boards are part of the leadership continuum?
Yes, so that was another important aspect. I was, privileged to lead the knowledge management programming team within our global practice. And unlike my previous assignments within the World Bank, where I pretty much was handed the strategy of the organizational unit I was in, and was asked to help implement its overall strategy and program using knowledge management tools and resources. I was part of the senior technical management team. I was able to influence strategy upstream and to be sort of fully familiar with the nuances, why choices had been made with strategy, and therefore to really marshal our knowledge management team resources and structures to address, the overall direction. The other aspect closely related to that was tying knowledge management and participation in communities into the overall personnel management ecosystem of the global practice. We use communities of practice as a way of building leadership, of providing a leadership opportunity to young upcoming staff who showed a propensity to wanting to, take on leadership roles. So they often were community of practice leaders. We selected representatives from communities of practice to present whenever we had meetings with senior leadership, including the president of the World Bank. Rather than having Ede or one of the other members of the management team present our activities or good practices, we would draw from within the communities. But we also assured that there was effective training in presentation skills, in communication, in synthesizing and being able to share lessons using techniques such as Ignite or lightning talks. So we sort of, in addition to the notion that everyone's knowledge was everyone's business, we looked at our practice as a community of communicators so that staff at all levels were not only being given the opportunity to take on technical leadership functions through COPs, but also to be able to effectively communicate these within and outside the organization.
Thank you, Phil. I see that many questions are also related to how to motivate people to continue engaging. So I will pick one of those. It says, what are some of the effective and meaningful ways to reward and recognize members of a community for their contribution and motivate engagement?
Yeah. So I just mentioned sort of a couple, the fact that being involved or active as a community leader was included as part of both the way we looked at our overall performance management, but also selected sort of our up-and-coming leaders. In addition to that, the recognition that came from being given the types of opportunities that I mentioned, being able to present to senior leadership or to be able to go to professional meetings or conferences. Often the community's leaders were given those opportunities. We found that at this type of level within membership in a community, professional recognition was often as, if not more important than, any adjustments to remuneration. So we tried to give as much acknowledgement and kudos and recognition to people who were involved. And this was very much part of overall performance management. The other way we kept people motivated was allowing people to suggest new communities over time and to take on leadership roles in those communities. We also linked our communities to some of our global knowledge sharing activities and functions, including a platform for multi-country knowledge exchange that Eddie alluded to in Tokyo. So communities were able to help develop week-long peer-to-peer knowledge sharing programs that were fully funded. And to be part of these, in Tokyo, we had similar programs elsewhere. So the ability to be involved in fun and interesting types of knowledge sharing programs that would sort of complement their day-to-day project management work, which often involves record keeping, reporting, and wasn't necessarily as personally satisfying. Use of those types of platforms and resources as a way to give staff a chance to really make use of the communities in non-project work was another way of keeping people engaged.
Thank you, Phil. And I mean, some years after the project, I still see the effect of that, because I am working at the Urban Global Practice now, and I still see how many of the leads from the knowledge silo breakers are now, have professionally grown, due to, of course, many other things, but also to the work that they did through their communities of practice. So we see all that happening. I see that we just have 1 minute, but so if we have a time, it would be if you could mention some tangible outcomes that these communities generated.
Yeah, I think that, let's see, I would point to a couple of cases where whole new business lines were established. Eddie referred to the group Urbanscapes, which was a group that focused on how to make cities more livable through the enhancement of public spaces, we'll call Urbanscapes. It started out as just a crazy group of people who had this new idea. And within a relatively short period of 3 years,
have gone into your report. And we said, no, that's not enough for us. That's not enough for us, because unless you are able to show that you have created a new solution, that you have opened a new business line that your clients are really interested in tapping into, unless you are changing the way that the knowledge that is created quickly gets to your client, it doesn't work. And therefore, we had different communities that identified success in different ways. So I mentioned, for example, our group of researchers who said, look, we really want to get our research to the field. And we gave them a challenge. Look, over the past, it has taken, and we had a few pieces of research that were very influential, but it took them 7 to 10 years to actually being applied in different countries. And we said, that's too long. 7 to 10 years in this world is like half a generation. They changed the name of your generation in 7 to 10 years. We want to move from 7 to 10 years to 18 months. And therefore, they began to say, okay, then we need to do research completely different way. We need to create a community practice that actually connects the researchers and the practitioners in specific areas that accelerate that band. So that's one example. And they, by the end of 3-4 years, were able to show cases where we said, this was the question, this was the research, this was the finding, this is how we applied 18 to 24 months. There was another one that said, look, there are solutions that we think are really important, but nobody's listening to us. Nobody inside the organization. We are just a group of young kids, and we think that this is really important. It happens a lot in issues of sustainability, in issues of technology for application, these kind of things. And then we said, okay, create a community of practice, and your challenge is to get your ideas and to make sure that clients out there pick your ideas. And within 3 years, they were able to have 5 new projects, have actually lending for a couple of $1 billion that were supporting tens of cities around the world on those crazy, what I used to call crazy ideas out there. So at the core, it was, how are you influencing the business of the organization? How do you become central to what the organization's survival and thriving is, so that you are not just generating knowledge, having conversations, having webinars? That's important, but that's not enough. That is not success for us.
Thank you. Had a brilliant examples. I like the connection with the core of the operations of the organization. That's very important. You mentioned you like to take questions in a batch. I see that some are coming through the document. Do you see them, or do you?
I see them. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I see a hand up. So why don't we go with the hand while I read the questions?
Let's go with Rob. Over to you.
Thanks for the opportunity. So I'm at quite an early stage in terms of community practice. In short, I work for a software company. I've been working in a knowledge management role for some years. I'm trying to get management to buy into this more, to sponsor me. I have a pitch tomorrow on this, and I'm trying to shape how can I sell the communities of practice in the best way for them to buy into it, see the value of it. I think that's probably my key question.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very good. And I see a couple of related questions in the Google Docs, which is actually, how do you actually not only convince leadership, but also make sure that they actually invest in the communities of practice and properly resource them if they don't understand what is the actual value added. Look, what we, in order to get people excited and in order to get budget from my bosses, we began by creating journeys of solutions, or really challenges that everybody talks about and is like, yeah, we need to solve that one day. So for example, everybody in our organization said, if we could only really move this solution faster from one client to the other, in a way that is not just standardized, but that balance of standardization and customization into this process was important. So figuring out in the organization, what are some of those things, barriers to provide better solutions to clients that at the end are created by internal silos, by people not talking to each other, by people not coming and creating that those spaces for creativity and conversations. So identify the silos, identify journeys of business opportunities, identify barriers that people will tell you, oh, we are not able to do that because it's the way that it is. And actually, we call our communities of practice actually knowledge silo breakers. Just to give a sense, because the communities of practice was like, yeah, we know what that is. And everybody comes with different biases. So we decided to change the name just to be very practical and saying we are breaking silos. We're breaking silos at the core, and this is what's going to give us these practical solutions. This is how we're going to grow our business. This is how we're going to give new ideas and solutions to our clients. So that's what helped us into that process. And on the budget side, what we found in the literature is that actually innovators within organizations don't necessarily need a lot of budget. Because once you give a lot of budget to an innovator, the bureaucracy of organizations come on it, and then they stifle them, and then they need to report so much that the innovation kills them. So finding that level of resource that actually allows them to, what I used to call grease the wheels, allows them to give a little bit of a space to break and connect and to actually mobilize others to bring resources was a lot more effective than just giving a big chunk of money that actually make them fat. If you make an innovator fat, they don't move fast enough, and therefore they are not able to go into that direction. So I hope that I gave you a few ideas, David, in that process. Let me read a few more.
Thank you.
David, if you want to summarize.
No, please go ahead. Lots of good questions there.
Lots of good questions. How do you ensure that the COPs were creating solutions that align with the overall organizational goals? And how do you assess the effectiveness of COPs? So we decided that in the gardening approach that I was describing before, we wanted to find that balance between letting many flowers bloom, getting the creativity of teams and communities to come up. We have periodic call for ideas from the lead management team. Said, okay, this is an important, we created, this is our global knowledge ecosystem. We want your ideas and saying, what kind of communities do you think that are there? And we created a little bit of a sense of where we wanted to go. We said, we don't want you just to do webinars. We want to influence the business. We don't want you to be just internally focused. You need to influence the world. So we gave them a few parameters, and turns out that a lot of people had really interesting ideas. So we were disciplined in coming, reading, giving feedback in their proposals. Simple, practical, non-bureaucratic, but very disciplined in forcing them to say, look, you need to tell the story. You need to do into this process. Now, once they write the work plan, then we let them go. We let them go. We do the process. We actually provided a background support because many of these people are technical people and they don't know about committees of practice. They don't know about knowledge management. So we had a team of knowledge management experts on committees of practice functioning to be able to support the technical teams. And that combination proved really practical in that sense. You don't want to be the committee of practice done only by the knowledge management team. You don't want them to do only by the technical professionals, whatever experts are in your organization. You want that combination to make it work. And then at the end of every 12 months, we come and say, okay, come back and tell us, what are you doing? What is the results? How are you influencing? And in that work plan, we were always pushing to say, how are you influencing the business? How are you providing new solutions? How are you going to make sure that these activities that you're proposing, these studies you're doing, these projects that you're developing are really going to have new solutions? And then come and tell us 12 months later, are you making progress in that direction? And we would also have knowledge fairs. Each of these communities will come together in a big conference room, and we will have a fun fair to really share what is it that is happening, not only on the technical business side, but also on the community side. How are we getting together? How are we doing that? We are in over 90 countries. We cover 16 time zones. That's really difficult for a community of practice. How do you actually connect in that direction? And this is some of the things that we allowed us from the leadership side to steer where to go, to measure the process, and to try to get a little bit of a sense of effectiveness. So we never went too strict on these are your common indicators, because each community had a different approach, a different problem that they wanted to solve. But we also did not want to be too loose. Everybody does whatever, you don't need to report. That balance was always important for us in that direction. Let me see. I see somebody in the chat that was coming. Okay. Okay. Now, so the personal, organization, and society level. So innovations may not be invented by the group at all, but by individuals outside the COP. Absolutely. It is not the COP that actually makes those innovations. Remember, there's no, the COP is a loose structure that allows people from different parts of the organization, from different geographies, to come to share, to brainstorm, and to allow them to, in their own local context, to solve some of those challenges that they want. And actually, that it is never a situation where you say, oh, this is a challenge, this is the solution, and everything works beautifully. Nothing. It's really complicated, and you're finding challenges all the way. And therefore, having a community to be able to throw questions and saying, we're really facing this complicated situation, and then another person come and say, oh yeah, we did that, we failed miserably because this and that, and then the community continuously share information that is very live. There is no dry reports at the end of 5 years of testing an idea, but it is that vibrancy that makes it. But the solutions are very much individual into this process. The solutions are with the specific clients, but it is that connectivity that prevents the failure that you're having a solution, you work on your pilot for 3-4 years, you write it up, and then you send it. But by the time that you send it, the other 100 people, the other 100 localities, the other 100 countries that were working on similar issues failed to have the opportunity to co-create, to learn from each other, to accelerate that process. Now, with new technologies and new platforms and all of that, that sharing becomes more important, but that's not the solution. The solution is that connectivity, people to people, that will be able to do that process. And a community is not limited to one organization. I couldn't agree more. There are many kinds of COPs, and actually our ambition for our communities of practice was to say, look, you really need to become a COP of COPs. You really need to be able to connect clients, connect inside the organization, but also connect to other organizations, and making sure that those lessons are brought into the group, and that the group helps many others in that process, that you really grow fast into that direction. Now, practical activities to foster engagement. Oh, that was, this is a good one, because it's always so difficult, as I was saying, when you're having community members all around the world in different time zones, really busy trying to solve problems. It is very difficult to do that. So we were always focused on fun and technical depth. It is that combination. So if it is only technical depth, it's way too boring. Some people get excited, but that's not too much. If it's only fun and there's not enough technical, yeah, you build that sense of community, but that's not what people want to join. They may come for a couple of times, they'll have good virtual years, but that's not what's going to happen. It is that combination of methodologies that allow people to have fun, to build a sense of community, to understand that the challenges are common, but also that technical depth of what are really the solutions that you are developing with your clients for the betterment of different communities in that process. So I think that was for us. So when we had global conferences where we brought people together, we again relied a lot on the communities of practice to design those conferences. So instead of having headquarters or a working group thinking through boring forums, we had our knowledge management team really providing the substrate, but actually getting the communities of practice to create fun activities with a very clear purpose that allows that interface to be able to do that. Because we were convinced that, yes, communities of practice through webinars are part of our daily life, but that face-to-face interaction, not only within the organization, but also with your clients, become really important in that creation, not only of a sense of community, but in creation of doing all that. Roadblocks in building the cups. Well, we try to bureaucracies, and especially large organizations, tend to really be very heavy on processes, and we try to keep our committees of practice under the radar screen of the big bureaucracy, because we wanted to create them agile. We wanted to allow them enough flexibility to move into this process. But we wanted basic practical discipline of thinking, reporting, moving forward, learning, experimenting, growing in that process. So I think that a danger is to have communities of practice that become too formal in the process, and we experimented with formal committees of practice, top down, this is what it is to do, or extremely informal, and we found that neither one works too well. The informal don't have enough attention and support of management, and therefore those members of the community don't always feel that management is giving them support, or that they're going to be getting better performance evaluation because of what they're doing. It's just too on the side. The formal was just too heavy, too top-down, too structured.
But I was looking at the Google Doc. I was spying on you this way, and there seemed to be a lot of questions. I'm sure you probably weren't able to go through all of them, but at least through some. And I realized, this could have been 4 hours, and still wouldn't have been enough. So before we move on into the last activity, I'd like to ask Ed and Phil just to, in a couple of minutes each, just share out of everything that you talked about and that you were asked about, what do you think is kind of most important for everyone else to know? Kind of key insights, nuggets, what have you, from your experience, from what you shared, that you really that you want people to live with,
Sure.
today.
But maybe I can ask David to, because I talked all the time and I answer questions all the time, but David was listening. David, one thing that surprised you that I think would be useful to report back to the group.
Well, I think that the one key message that you repeated, because it's so important, that you have to really link the objective of the community of practice to the objectives of the organizations. Communities of practice, they had a purpose. They were a tool to deliver on the mandate of the organization. They were not something on the side, not something to just promote the generic sharing of information, which is important. It's paramount, but they were something more. They became a means to an end, and that end was the same end of the entire organization. That's the key message for me.
And a second message that I think came in a few questions was balance. Community of practice that are very structured, top-down, bureaucratic, don't function too well. Committees of practice that are too loose, too far removed from management, too left on their own, don't work either. Finding that balance is important. Or, for example, the structure and budgets and reporting that is too strict can kill the committee of practice creativity and innovation. Committees of practice that don't have a clear work program and objectives and reporting then just go into doing webinars and stopping there. So always thinking of that balance to make sure that you don't end up in corner solutions that don't work as well in the communities. Sarko, back to you.
Great, thank you.
I think one of the important issues are to involve the members, to recognize their contributions, to engage them in different activities. So not only create a space to prize them, but also create like personal recognition and how they get engaged in different activities. So they can also take different leaderships within the community activities.
Yeah, and one more thing that I would like to point out is it's the level of strategy and the structure and support that was put in place for the communities to work. So, I mean, there was this whole process of, I mean, applying for, or it's a different word, but for teams to, I mean, propose for the COP. So they already have to have like a core team, a very good team involved. There has to be, I mean, linked between the community in the global practice and all the global practice, so that you would make sure that the knowledge would flow. There was this connection with the strategy, like Ede said, there was like community managers in place, so that there would be like this professional work for the community to work also on the daily basis, the evaluation. So everything was very well thought of and structured for it to be, I mean, integrated and to work.
Phil, you muted
Just
yourself.
to
Yeah, go ahead.
quickly add to what Rocio and Claudia have indicated, I think that I think that the three elements that were key to the approach that was taken to communities of practice was the bottom-up approach to the identification of the communities, so that it was very much seen as inclusive. The centralization of the community management function to ensure that all communities had a strong professional community manager. And I want to acknowledge Yvonne Butina, who is, I think, here in this session, who helped us put that group together. And then thirdly, as Ede referred to, having a robust monitoring and evaluation framework, but one that was very much to ensure buy-in, that allowed each community to determine the indicators by which it would be judged themselves, rather than imposing upon them. They were within certain categories, but the communities would choose, for example, whether they wanted to have number of new members or number of activities or number of contributions to project reviews, things that were very operational, but which they were able to choose themselves. And then finally, as Claudia mentioned, using the communities as part of the overall personnel management and leadership development approach of the global practice, to use the communities as a way of giving young and emerging leaders the opportunity to take on some type of a role and to be recognized for it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. We're running a little late, but I still like to create some time for our last activity before we check out. Before we get into that, just two reminders. One, Google Doc, very important. If you want to go and fill out the table at the top with your information so that you connect with others, you can do that anytime. Two, under that, the section with all the questions and notes, please feel free to put your key insights, quotes, whatever, what have you there, so that it's captured for everybody. And then three, in terms of the upcoming activity, now it's basically more of a choose your own adventure. We'll have 8 rooms. You can see the topics of each one with a little bit of framing in the Google Doc, somewhere around 28 or so by now. What we're going to do is just that's free flowing, go to a room, talk to people, meet people, discuss a little bit on that topic. It's not a lot of time, but still an opportunity to connect and reflect on what you heard and figure out how to apply it in your own context. And then do take notes there as well. There's a space in the Google Doc for each room to take some notes from the discussion. So we'll take about 10 minutes to do that now before we wrap up. The same principle applies. In the interest of time, you'll just randomly be assigned to one of the 8 rooms, but you have the ability to move. So if you're really driven to one of the topics over another one, just choose a different room and go from there. So opening the rooms now. We'll see you in about 10 minutes for the wrap up.
I'm quite new to this, and I suppose my question would be is what are the top 3 things or top 5 things to get one of these up and running and to be successful in doing so?
I think that's a great question, Rob. I initiated a COP with Claudia when I was at BDO, and I'm actually looking at COP in collective well-being. And I think it's so important to identify the purpose, like
even better. And now, Beverly, off to you before Claudia wraps us up officially.
Thanks so much, Zarko. So I'll just go ahead and input the same links that I shared. If you want to be part of our community on WhatsApp, here is the link. And here are also some links to some sessions that are coming up within the week and within next week. I would especially encourage you to participate in the WhatsApp group because that's where we do get to not only build relationships with one another, but to also just share and input tools and skills and knowledge that we use within our organizations and our networks as well. So I see that there isn't any link there, but let me just fix that right now. So here are the links, and I hope to be able to see you soon. Yes, so Zarko, you can check us out in the meantime.
Ross, you first. Did you want to say something? Okay. Then Claudia, off to you.
So yeah, just wrapping up. Thank you very much for joining us today. This has been very special for us. I know that it was a lot of information. Please go back to the Google Doc. This is going to continue being available to you. Check out the important links session so that you can find out more resources about communities. We will ask Ede and Fio to spend a little bit more time answering the questions because there were lots of questions in focus groups. So that resource is going to continue being available to you. I hope you continue strong in your community of practice journey. If you want to discuss, brainstorm how to make your communities better, how to bring more advocacy to your communities, feel free to reach out to Zarko and to myself or the members of the group in the document, the networking document that you have there. It will be a pleasure to, meet, talk, discuss, and help you make things better. We do understand that communities are the solution to very complex problems because collective intelligence is what we need. So thank you everybody for joining. We will be here for 10 more minutes. So if you want to stick, stand by and ask a few more questions, Zarko and I will be here a little bit longer. If you have to go, thank you very much for joining us.
Claudia,
Thank
Zarko,
you.
thank you so much for the invitation. All the best.
Thank you so much,
you,
Ede.
everyone.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Zarko.
Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you for the opportunity and good luck to
Thank you,
everybody
Theo.
with your own knowledge management journeys.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much.